so, you know, of course, when we had come here originally, we had brought some pot plants with us, you know, and that didn't go well. We had these plants, and we were living at the house that had been built by Bob, and then later on, that was part of the property that went to the partners. But we had put our plants way up the hill. We were dragging water up there, and then when we got our own road and we moved back down further down the valley, these people came that the partner said could live in the house, and they ended up chopping down our plants one day, you know. We didn't know what we were doing, you know. Back then, nobody knew. It's like, I remember when one of the neighbors years later is like, of course, everybody sitting around Whitethorn, you know, that was our sort of social thing, to go get your mail and you'd see your neighbors. And one of the gals, she's like, fertilizer? What do you mean? Females? You know, I mean, people were smoking the leaf and stuff like that back then, because, you know, people had seeds from Mexican pot, and actually, my parents had especially my dad, all, you know, a lot of that group, the Bohemians, they were smoking weed and, you know, partying and whatnot. So they had actually them and a lot of their friends in Albuquerque had grown pot, you know. So back then my mom's like, oh, it's just a weed, you know. So it's interesting to see what it's come today. But, you know, early on I decided, I just can't be a pot farmer. That's really not my thing. I don't mind having pot plants in my garden, you know, and having your own, or be able to give it to people and stuff like that. But that was not a focus. I couldn't, and when 60 Minutes came out to the Gulch and did one of their first, 60 Minutes came along with camp. I don't think it was called camp then, and I don't remember what year it was, mid-70s, you know, and they came out to the Gulch, and it's one of the neighbors that's, you know, not too far away, and they're like, oh yeah, they got 200 plants down there, and I'm scratching my head going, who the hell wants to take care of 200 plants, you know? It's like, what for? So it's really interesting now to see what it's become, and I'm not real thrilled with the whole thing. But this morning I was thinking about the kids who have grown up whose parents have only supported themselves by being pot farmers, you know, because even though pot was part of our life and we didn't know it as kids, we didn't know that's what our parents were doing, and as we got older, that wasn't in their lives at all, really. Maybe my bio dad, but we didn't see him. But not in our other crowd. They were drinkers, you know, they were the cocktail crowd and stuff like that. So, you know, when I was raising my kids, I always said, don't do it like I did. Because, like, I wasn't a pot farmer. I always had other things going, or I could go off. We had a fabric store in Berkeley. I'd go work there. And when we first moved up here, we'd go spend a few weeks and do, like, we had a friend who was a realtor, and he'd buy, you know, it'd help him out with cleaning up and repairs and things like that. So we'd go make a bunch of money and buy a bunch of supplies and go, you know, hibernate at home, you know, and have our gardens and other things like that. So I always told my kids, like, don't do it like I did. I don't know. So they all, because I didn't finish, I'll go back high school. I never finished high school. So then later I ended up getting my GED and doing college and stuff like that. But pretty much formal education ended about like 8th or 9th grade. But at the same time, we had always grown up on the university. As kids, as little kids, that's where we spent all our time, was at UNM, you know. So we were always getting an education, and books were huge in our lives, you know, our parents, you know. So there was no end of education going on all the time. So I didn't feel like bereft in that way, but I do think, you know, there are gaps in formal education for me, but you know, for my kids to go all through school and graduate, and now my son's working on his PhD, and you know, both my kids have done some really amazing things. So I really wonder what's going to happen to this generation, like I say, whose parents have only always supported themselves with marijuana, because I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where that goes now that they're talking about these huge farms here in, you know, in our county. And I don't know if that's right or not. But it's been a really interesting life here, because I stayed in the Gulch for a long time, but then I came and went to the Bay Area and whatnot, and I met in 79, I think it was early 79, I met my daughter's dad, and Peter Danto, and he was a pilot. He'd grown up in New York, but moved to the Bay Area pretty young, as a teenager, and planes were his whole life, so I remember the first flight we came up here and whatnot, and we ended up staying together, and our daughter was born in 81, and we always came and went. We had, we'd fly into Sid Green's field in Whitethorn often. And after Peter graduated from San Jose, he had gone to Alameda and he had an airframe and power plant license, and then he went and got he was aeronautical operations, and we were actually talking to the county, to Roy Bettiga, about trying to start up a little FBO out at Shelter Cove, because it was close to the Gulch and whatnot. And one day Sid Green calls and says, "Oh, I hear the Garberville Airport's up for grabs," which it wasn't really. And it was funny that the county guy from aviation had never mentioned it or anything, but because they kind of already had somebody picked out. Leo Etter had been running the place for years, and I'm not really sure what happened there with his contract and why they decided that they didn't want him in there anymore. But they were talking to somebody else from Bryceland, and I don't know, they liked Peter. They liked, he had these credentials and da-da-da-da. So there we were all of a sudden, renting the Garberville Airport and getting that sort of up and going. And so we were out there through most of the 80s, And I loved that life. Flying in small airplanes, as far as I'm concerned, is really the way to travel, It was a great adventure. But, we did have a couple of really bad bumps in the road. Like in 84, his brother took off from Garberville at like 11 o'clock at night and crashed into Reed Mountain, and that was really traumatic. That was a very complicated story, and it took a month to find the airplane and everything and whatnot. So things sort of, bumped along for a while, but that was really traumatic for everybody. It's kind of not a happy period. But the airport overall was a great, adventure. And it went along with a lot of the travel. We did a lot of travel with my parents off and on and whatnot. And I have to say, one thing that was really great about all the travel I've done is, besides in the United States, but all the places I've been outside of the United States, I have been able to go to places that not very many people in the world will really go to, and be able to live there and stay there. And so that was a great godsend from my dad, and just also my daughter. My daughter went to the Peace Corps, and I went and saw her. There's another little place in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, Kiribati, that nobody even hardly knows about, So I had hoped to go back there myself as a Peace Corps volunteer, but they closed it down after she left for different reasons, so. But all through that, this has been my base, really my base in life. I would go back to the Bay Area and help my mom at times. She had debilitating arthritis for a while. We also had a fabric store in the Bay Area in the 70s. So, and when Peter was going to school, we'd be there. But, we always had our base here in the Gulch. And then after I had kids, and I had been living at the airport, it would always be the back and forth between there and the Gulch and whatnot. And but if my daughter went into school, she didn't want to go to Whale Gulch School, and I kind of didn't want her to either, because Whale Gulch School is a great place, but also I think there's a certain thing about it. It's like community and social and home is just like all intertwined, and kind of at that point there sort of wasn't enough inside or outside coming in, even though a lot of those kids and a lot of the families traveled a lot and saw other things, and obviously everyone had families in other parts of the country and whatnot. It was a little sort of cloistered more at that point, and she wanted to go to Redway School anyways, so she went to Whitethorn Preschool, which was great. I started working with Eric and Victoria Schaefer out there when she started going to preschool, and that was really great because I had often volunteered at Whitethorn School before I had kids, when sort of like the quote-unquote hippies were just starting to become the teachers and whatnot. So I'd volunteer there sometimes, so the preschool, I started to meet more people, and at that point, after her dad and I split up a few years later, when she was at Redway School, I started as a volunteer first at Redway School, and I worked with Kathy Prince, and she was like, well, when are you going to get your teacher's degree? And I'm like, oh, I see how hard you guys work. I don't know, but it did suit my schedule and the things I was doing, and I became an aide there. So it was like, the half day, and I could do that. And I have always been, a lot of times had my own little businesses, sewing and making quilts or clothes or whatnot. So I still had time to do that. I worked at Redway School for 20 years. And I loved being in there with the kids and the teachers, and I just feel really lucky, and the experiences I've had and the people it's brought into my life, lifelong friends and whatnot. And, I worked there until the late 90s actually, and then by that time I was, mostly living in town. I mean, still have my place out in the Gulch and whatnot, but I've had a lot, some people help me out there, like living there more full time than I was in my cabin over some of those years, and that fluctuated, so it's always easy to keep, connected out there and doing that. And I never have built like, instead of my little cabin in the woods, I always had a dream to build like my art house or something like that. And I still have that dream, but I think it feels farther away now, After my husband died, things just sort of shifted, Like when you have someone to share the dream with, it's a little different. And actually my son was born in 1991. My daughter was born in 1981, and then my son was born in 1991. And unfortunately, my relationship with his dad didn't really last too long or whatnot. And we're still good friends, and his kids and my son and like my niece and my nephew and my kids, that they all see themselves as like, this is their family, the stepkids and the nieces and the nephews and the cousins, and that's kind of like how they relate. It's like, this is our family, so, and that's really been great. It's like, when my mother left my bio dad, he, like I said, after a few years, he just sort of stayed away because he didn't think the vibes that she put out to him, we should be subjected to. It was kind of cop out on his side and stuff too. So it wasn't until I was a teenager, I was the one that decided I wanted to have a relationship with him, and, so it's been really great to see how the kids keep their connections and have one family.